Nighthawks at the diner, Emma's 49ers. It's a rendezvous with strangers round the coffee urn tonight. Today we're looking at the music of Tom Waits. And Tom Waits is a very hard act to classify. Hard to know where to fit him in. It was kind of jazz piano, and then he moved into something very different in performance art. But it's hard to know. It's not rock, it's not folk, it's not country. He certainly defined a niche that was all his own. First time I had heard of or seen Tom Waits was in 1977. He was a guest on TV show Fernwood Tonight, which was a takeoff on television talk shows, and it was hosted by the stars Martin Mull and Fred Willard. Band leader was Frank Duvall, who again was a legitimate band leader and did a lot of soundtracks for TVs and movies. The premise was Tom's tour bus had broken down and they had him come on the show. And while he was there, he did an interview, but he sang the song, "The Piano Has Been Drinking, Not Me." And of course, if you knew Tom Waits' style, this was very humorous. It was very unusual. So I went out and I checked out the record albums to see what he might have out because it piqued my interest. First album I bought of his was Foreign Affair. And a few beat style songs on there, guest appearance by Jack Sheldon, some nice tunes. And this is one of those times, and I mentioned a couple of shows ago, that usually with me, the first album I buy is the one that turns out to be my favorite. While this was a good album, it turned out it wasn't my favorite. And this is one of those rare times that the first album just didn't make the favorite cut. So I went back and I checked out some other albums he had out. Luckily, he'd been recording for quite a while, so I had a lot to catch up on, a lot to pick from. We had Closing Time, Heart of Saturday Night, one I quoted from at the beginning, Nighthawks at the Diner, recorded live in the studio, and Small Change. So those are a good number of albums, kind of get an idea of his style. By the time he hit Small Change, he was getting to the really defining that Tom Waits style. There was a kind of a beat narrative, there was nice songs. I can remember there was a quote, and I may not have it exactly right, but it was something along the lines of Tom Waits saying, "I love beautiful melodies telling me terrible things." And this really wrapped up what Tom Waits was about. Some great melodies, but sometimes the stories were a little edgy. The album that really hooked me, and this was my favorite Tom Waits album, was Blue Valentines. It's one of those albums that I've had on vinyl, I've had it on tape, I've had it on CD, I have it on my digital devices now. It's one I keep coming back to as one that really defined what Tom Waits was all about in this period. To me, every song was a great one. Mostly all his. We had him doing his rendition of the Somewhere from West Side Story, and that's just excellent as well. And again, some jazz performers helping him out along the way with this. This was followed up a year later or so by Heart Attack and Vine. And this was his last album on Asylum. And again, it was very similar in style to Blue Valentines. But the last album he did of this style, by the time he switched over and went to the new record label, he released Swordfish Trombones, and again, that was a whole different style of music. A little less about the piano, the bass, the drums, that jazzy sound. I don't want to really call it carnival music, but it could be anything from accordions to banging on a tin garbage can that he was using as a way of getting his music across. So it was very different from what he'd done up to this time. Certainly a lot of his songs had been recorded by other artists, Norah Jones, Bruce Springsteen, Rod Stewart. His music is very accessible with some of the tunes. Not everything. Not everybody's going to enjoy everything Tom Waits does. But if you're adventurous, if you're looking for something completely different, if you're looking for music that's unlike anything you've experienced at this stage, take a look at some of Tom Waits' work. Again, the things after 1978 or so are a little harder to get into, maybe not as accessible. So my recommendation, if you were starting out, maybe things like Closing Time, which had the song Old 55 on it, which was recorded by the Eagles. So a little more easy listening. not easy listening and, that kind of easy listening, but easier, more accessible listening. And, of course, my favorite, Blue Valentine. So, and Heart Attack and Vine. Those 3 albums will give you a good idea what he was doing at the time. And Heart of Saturday Night. I mean, there's some great tunes on there, too, and a very accessible album. So a chance to check out Tom Waits. I don't want to say the early years, because I know there were some albums that were released ahead of this that were really Tom Waits' early years, which really weren't in the same style. So I'm going to call this Tom Waits' middle era. It's not the early years, it's the development stage where he created that persona and before he turned the corner after Heart Attack and Vine into a whole new style of music. So if you get a chance, check him out. Thanks very much for stopping by. We'll see you on Monday. Everybody have a great weekend.